If you're looking for a quick video on how to make a webtoon episode from start to finish, I'm sorry, this isn't going to be the one. I've been wanting to make this video for quite a while, and the reason it took me so many months is because I wanted this video to be a thorough one that shows you guys every step of my process, from writing rough ideas on scratch paper all the way down to scheduling an episode to go live. Assuming you already have some characters in mind and a general story idea, here's the steps I take in making each episode of my webcomic, Fairy Lantern. Brainstorm the episode. At the start, I have an outline of the whole story in very simple points, like literally beginning, middle, end. And then using that as my guide, I generally just brain dump on a scrap piece of paper or in a notebook a short sentence or two of what I want to happen in any given episode. Like, really simple. Over time, I have built much more around the story, like side characters, extra plots, and solidified my main plot, which is why I'm remaking this prologue to include more stuff. But it's okay to start simple and build as you go, and really don't stress all the details right away. So here's a quick summary of what I want to happen in this episode. For the prologue, I want Regan to be falling through a stained glass world. Flashes of future panels and scenes will happen between the narration, and the episode ends with her standing in front of a human-sized fairy trapped in a lantern. I'm only a minute and a half into this voiceover and I'm already calling my main character a tramp. What am I doing? Anyway, the next step is to usually write the script. I hop onto my computer to actually type it out in a more formal way in a Word doc. Even though I say more formally, I still keep it loose. For example, if I have characters talking, I write general ideas of what I would like them to say, but I don't stress on how they say it in character yet. I think it's important because it's easy to get hung up on how you want a character to say stuff, but as someone who struggled with a lot of that in the beginning, I think it's better just to get it all written down first and then go back and clean it up. I just write the goals of what I need them to say and do, and then move on down the script. This does get easier after a while of working on your comic. Your characters' personalities will start to write themselves after some time. For example, I have a character named Mr. Carlson. He didn't have much of a personality when I started drafting episodes with him in it, so I stuck to generic lines for his part of the script, like, "The neighbor says good morning to Regan." Regan's my main character. And later I add his personality in while I'm drawing and thinking about his character and his relationship with Regan. So he might say something like, "Hey kiddo," or "Morning kiddo," instead of just the standard "good morning." Or another example, also using Mr. Carlson because he's just my easiest character to use in an example, I guess. In a future scene, I want him to try calming Regan down through a panic attack. And in the script, I might write something like, "Mr. Carlson says some calming words of encouragement." But by the time I actually get to adding in the speech bubbles, it might have evolved into something like, "Hey Regan, how do you eat a shitburger?" And Regan will look up at him in absolute confusion, and he'll just continue and say, "You eat it one bite at a time. Let's tackle this problem one thing at a time. Okay, kiddo?" So for scripting purposes, you can see where like that first one just kind of helps you get the idea out that you need the character to calm another character down. And then later you can go in and add their personality into it and how they would actually say what they need to calm the other character down and that kind of stuff. So I guess to sum up the scripting part of the process, I just find it easier to script with general ideas of what I want the characters to say instead of fretting about exactly how they will say it at this point. And then I build from there, one bite at a time. Storyboard thumbnails. Once I'm done with the general script, I go back to pen and paper to sketch out my storyboard. And yes, I said pen because if I have a pencil, I have the ability to erase and therefore overthink all of my panels. I can do that later on the computer, but for now, it's ye old traditional art. These storyboards are literally stick figures with a rough idea of expressions, compositions, and word balloon planning. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, just get the ideas out as quickly as you can. Read your script and let it play out visually in your head as if you were watching your favorite anime or show, and just go from there. Other tips on storyboard phase. Write out your narration or speech bubbles in the storyboard to get an estimate of how big they need to be. It doesn't have to be the whole thing. You can draw lines to represent the text, but I do find that it helps me plan out the flow of the speech bubbles, and I can see how many panels go in between. It also kind of serves as a landmark for when I go back in the digital rough, which I'll show you in a second. It helps me remember which speech bubbles belong to which part of the dialogue and stuff from the script. Rough digital draft. Once that's done, I hop back onto the computer and open up Clip Studio Paint. I'll go over my file setup and stuff, so if you don't want to hear about it, feel free to skip ahead. So I create a new file and select the comic icon, which is the second icon there. And I go through and select where I want my comic to live. So I have a file structure set up in place because I need to be a little more organized with my comic. But anyway, so I have a file set up, and I'll just go and make sure that it is saved in the prologue folder, which is episode 0. And I'll put it in the raw files section, and that's where it'll live. Once I do that, I make sure that I actually name the file, so it's just not the generic comic. I really should have used a tripod or something for this, because I was filming with one hand trying to type with the other. So thankfully for the voiceover, it's fine though. Anyways, I set the width to 1600 1600 pixels, and 10,000 for the height. Make sure the color settings are correct. I default the paper color to be like off gray, just because it's easier on my eyes. And then for the page settings, which is really blurry, there it is. For the page settings, I do about 6 pages, and I make sure that the time lapse is recording, just for my own personal reasons. And yeah, I check everything and I hit OK, and now my file is set up the way I would like it to be set up for making the comic. Ta-da! I also want to talk about organizing your comic digitally for just a quick second here. So for me, I have everything separated out into episodes, like the long form episodes, not the chopped up ones that I post on Webtoons and Tapas. But so I have my folders set up, so it's like episode 1, episode 2, episode 3, and then within each of those folders I have another folder that's for the episode work in progress pieces, a folder for the final long form version of that episode, just one big long form. I do a final split version, which is the chopped up ones that I set up to be my weekly updates. Then I have a folder for all the thumbnails that episode generates, which is usually about 4 thumbnails per episode, maybe 5, maybe 3. And then I have a folder for the raw files to sit in, which is usually just, at this point, it's just the Clip Studio Paint comic file. And then finally, I just have a miscellaneous file that I named Rough Clips, because that's where, you know, if I take a work in progress screenshot of something, I'll just dump it into that folder. But I find that having a place for everything for my comic keeps it very organized. And especially since I don't have a whole lot of time to actually work on my comic, I want to make sure that things are set up and ready, that like my workspace is ready for me to just jump straight into working on stuff, and I'm not having to sit here and shuffle around and try to find stuff and everything. So I think organization is very important. especially if you don't have a lot of time to work on your comic and stuff. It kind of streamlines, smaller parts of the process, and, does have that ripple effect of long term, you save up a lot of time not having to dig around and find stuff on your computer. All right, back to the rough draft. Once I set everything up the way I'd like it, I begin to redraw my storyboard. I know I could skip a step and just scan it in, or just start the storyboard digitally from the beginning, but this gives me a second chance to think about the layout and panels. And usually what I find is that I end up redrawing or adding new panels. And having that extra step helps me stay flexible in my process, where I wouldn't have been if I had stayed with the initial storyboard. So just weird hang-ups for me, I guess. The sketch layer sits on its own layer, and I do a rough pass before I go back and clean it up even more. This is usually just done on the same layer, and at this point I also try to drop the text layer for the speech bubbles in, but since it's my least favorite part, I tend to put it off until the last step. Flat colors. Once I've decided that the sketches can be left alone, I make a new layer for all of the flat colors. Yep, one layer to rule them all. I usually have a separate file open with my character sheets to reference colors from. I get to work filling in my sketch on the layer underneath. Since my sketches are pretty messy, the fill tools don't really work for me at the moment, but I'm still trying to do some research to see if I can, because it would save me a bunch of time. But for now, it's just the old manual coloring. Once all the flat colors are laid down, I make a new layer above it and set it as a clipping layer. I then select the flats I want to shade and begin painting in the shadows and highlights roughly on the clipped layer, usually with a soft airbrush or the G pen for the harder edges. I do this for the whole episode and leave the backgrounds out for now. Also, if I haven't already, I hit the subscribe button. I changed my line art to a dark brown. It just makes the comic look a little softer, and it fits my personal tastes. Painting! My most favorite part, and also the longest part of my whole process. With the rough colors out of the way, I make a new layer above everything else, and I begin going panel by panel, just painting over the characters. I don't always start in order. Most of the time I usually start with my second favorite panel out of the whole episode, or just one that seems like it will help me ease into a good workflow. But I always try to save my favorite panel or two for last, since it will help me stay motivated for the more boring or redundant panels. For paintbrushes, I use a modified chalk brush to blend the colors into each other, the default soft airbrush for extra blending, and the default G pen for some crisp lines and highlights. Once I've painted a good chunk of the panels, I tend to go back and start working on the backgrounds. I try not to save them for very last because my motivation for drawing them is pretty low. So knowing myself and my workflow helped me figure out that I shouldn't save it for dead last. And actually moving forward, I want to try putting at least the line art phase of the backgrounds in before I start with flat colors. Drawing the line work for me is like half the battle after all. I still fully freehand my background paintings at this point. One of my goals this year was to learn Blender and to be able to make the backgrounds more consistent, but unfortunately that goal hit the back burner pretty hard these past few months, and I've fallen back into my comfort zone. I might focus on learning it during my maternity leave in February though, but we'll see. That's really if I have time between raising my toddler and caring for my newborn. So it'll be hit or miss if I have any free time there. The cleanup phase. With most of the painting done, usually 1 or 2 panels left, I start to clean up the word balloons and drop in the text. I also make a separate layer for all the sound effects to go on. Since I have written my script beforehand, I just copy-paste stuff directly into the comic. I start to shape my text to the rough balloons I had sketched and adjust the shape accordingly. If there ends up being too much text for one bubble, I break it up into more balloons. Generally speaking, you should not exceed 5 lines in a speech balloon because it becomes more difficult for the readers to stop their momentum and read the whole thing. You'll also want to make it resemble a diamond shape as much as possible for extra readability. Some other helpful tips on this part of the process. You can check your text font size with the Clip Studio companion app on your phone. If you're squinting at it, it's too small. If you don't have the companion app, or if you're using an entirely different software, you just zoom in on your comic on your screen until it's roughly about the same width as your phone. Like you can literally just hold your phone up next to your screen and see if you can still read the text. And if you can, you're not squinting, then you know it's a good size. Stick to maybe 1 or 2 fonts for your whole comic for consistency, and pick the same color as your line art or your darkest shadows to help join the word balloons with your art. Keep it consistent so your readers know the real crazy stuff is about to happen when you change those word balloons up to different fonts and colors. On a side note, for my text, I use a free font called Anime Ace 3 from Blambot. There we go. I like the chunky weight, it's easy to read, and it pairs well with my thicker line art style. And also because the graphic design major in me refuses to just flat out use Comic Sans. So with the text ready to go, I select it all and put it into a folder so I can toggle it on and off to just look at the art if I want to. And that way it keeps the dozens of text layers that it generates much more manageable. I'm now ready to start drawing all the word balloons. Personally, I really like drawing my own, and I'm really happy that there's a freehand balloon tool. I use the keyboard shortcut. I use the keyboard shortcut T to go from text tool to balloon tool, which is very clever there, Clip Studio Paint. Thank you. I set the foreground color to dark brown, which is the same as my line art, and the background color to the whitest white that I have in my comic. And then I get to work drawing the big old bubbles all around my text. The software has a sense to pair the text with your balloons, which is pretty cool. And once I'm done drawing the bubbles, I hit Y on the keyboard to bring up the anchor point tool. All the balloons are vector based, so if you have anything wonky going on, you can use this tool to adjust stuff, or by holding Alt while using this tool, you can flat out just delete unflattering anchor points and clean up your speech bubbles. Once the bubbles are clean, I go back through and adjust the text to fit nicely inside each bubble. This is made pretty easy by using the shortcut O to select the text and then K to move it around without having to dig through layers. Since the text is paired with your bubbles, you can also move the whole thing around or even adjust the size of the bubble if you think it's too big or too small for the text. Also, I've been saying bubble when I've been meaning to say balloon, but I kind of just use them interchangeably. So if I say bubble, I'm also meaning balloon. If I say balloon, I mean bubble, but it's the dialogue for your character and the little outline that is in there. Last quality check. With that done, I go back through the whole episode and check for anything that looks off. I make sure that my main character Regan has freckles in every panel. I look for any missing fairy wings that I might have missed drawing, or any other details on the characters that I could have overlooked. And then I go back through again and I check for the backgrounds to make sure that things are also looking consistent. With the art looked through, I turn my attention back to the speech balloons. I turn my attention back to the speech balloons and I look for any typos and also check to see if I missed any uppercase I's. This is just a personal preference for me, but I like that it's easier to read, so all my I's are lowercase in that font. Saving it out for Webtoon format. Once I'm sure I've looked at the episode enough times, I finally save the whole file again. I select the episode file, so not the individual panels. I select the .cmc file, and then I go up to the top and hit File, Export Webtoon. The Export Webtoon menu will pop up. I make sure it's going to the correct folder, save it as a JPEG, because PNG files take up way too much data in my opinion. I check the name on the file to make sure that it's what I want. I keep the scale at 100% for Webtoon since they're not too picky about the width. I make sure all pages are selected, and on a side note, for a larger episode, I would usually break it up into smaller parts, so I would actually use that page range for both of those. But since the prologue is just one single piece, I don't need to, so I'll just save it with all pages. And then finally, I divide vertically by 2000 pixels, and right below that, it gives me a calculated number of files and the total height of the whole episode. So I know if I exceed that 100 file limit on Webtoon or not. I hit OK, and the program does the rest of the work, populating that folder with all those yummy slices of your episode. Are we done? Nope. I create a new illustration file for the thumbnail. Using the specs Webtoon lays out for the thumbnail, I hit OK again, and then I go back into my comic episode, turn off visibility on the text and balloon layers, and then I'll use the marquee tool to select an artwork that I think will be appropriate for the thumbnail. I copy and paste it into the new file I just made, and if I'm splitting up that episode into multiple parts, I just go and grab more artworks from later in the episode to add to that file. With those artworks copied, I adjust the size and then go File, Export Single Layer, JPEG. I save out to my thumbnails folder, naming the thumbnails accordingly. With that done, I have everything ready to actually upload Fairy Lantern's newest episode to the webcomic sites. If this is your first episode ever, I'll walk you through how to do that real quick. And you know, if it's not your first time, then you can skip ahead to the next chapter. On Webtoon, if this is your first episode of your comic ever, you'll go to the Publish button right next to your account name. Click it, and it will take you to a page where you can make a new series. This page looks pretty close to the usual upload page too, so you'll see the similarities in a moment. You'll select your genres. Don't worry, you can change it later, but you'll want to select 2. Name your comic, and give a short, quick summary of what your comic is about. There's a few videos out there on how to write good summaries. Walter Osley definitely has one, so I'll leave a link to his channel in the description. But really, his whole channel is a treasure trove of Webtoon knowledge, so I definitely highly recommend that you check it out if that's what you're here for. Upload your comic's thumbnail. This will be the thumbnail that appears throughout the whole website, so treat it like a comic book cover, and definitely look for the best first impressions. The vertical thumbnail is something relatively new for Webtoon, but other sites like Tapas have had it for a little while longer. This thumbnail will only appear in the Webtoon Canvas featured carousel, so it's not as important, but do make sure that you also go for best first impressions. For, you know, that fateful day, you might see it in the carousel, which it can happen. Finally, there is a checkbox at the bottom that basically asks you if your comic contains mature themes and situations. And if it does, check the box. If it doesn't, leave it and click Create Series. Woohoo! Alright, uploading a new episode to Webtoon. You'll go to your account, dashboard, add episode. You'll be taken to a page that looks pretty much like this. It will say your series title at the top. You'll have the option to name your episode, which I suggest taking a line of dialogue from the episode you're uploading. It makes it easier for readers to go back to specific episodes if they want to reread something, and it's just more interesting than the standard episode 1, episode 2, episode 3. Grab your episode thumbnail from your folder and upload it here. Then you'll select the episode files to upload. Go to your folder, click on one of the files and hit Ctrl-A to select them all and upload. This might take a while if you have a slow internet connection. So while you wait, you can think of something clever to put in your creator's note section. I like to say something funny or random to see if my readers actually read them or not. You can preview your comic on desktop and mobile, just to have that one last quality check before scheduling. Or if you don't think you're ready, you can simply hit Save Draft and come back to it later. On a side note, I'll usually upload a rough draft of my episode to see how it looks in the preview, especially before I found out about the companion app for Clip Studio Paint. So if you're using a different software, this is a way you can preview it. The next part is to decide if you want to enable comments. Usually you'll want to, but it is cool that there is an option to disable it. When you hit a certain milestone for readership, you'll likely be eligible for ad sharing and reward ads. I'll see if I can talk about that in a different video, but that's what it looks like. Hi! And then finally, you'll have the option to either publish it immediately or schedule it. I prefer scheduling because I like to try and have about 4 weeks of buffer, but whatever floats your boat. The time zone is automatically set to your local time if you're wondering about that. Take a deep breath and hit that publish episode button, and we're done! Yay! So that's how I make an episode of my webtoon from start all the way to finish. My total time to complete an episode is usually over the course of a whole month, but it has become longer with pregnancy, fatigue, and wrangling an ever-growing toddler. So if you're a toddler mom like me, trying to make a comic between nap times and potty training, you might like this video right here. And if you want more comic making advice, please check out my channel. Thanks for watching. Bye!